Jodie. Good morning, everyone. As Jodie says, my name's Grainne. I'm also a barrister in Garden Court Chambers and one of the vice chairs of the Bar Human Rights Committee. Thank you to Jodie and to the speakers in that brilliant session, Yasmin, Adam and Ruth. I hope you all enjoyed it. Our session is a little bit different, but no doubt still of interest to all of you, which is about strengthening the rule of law and civil society through pro bono work and culture. And we are delighted and very honoured to have with us, I hope, all our speakers, who I know you'll be really excited to hear from. So good morning to Yasmin Batliwala MBE, the CEO of Advocates for International Development, who you can see on your screen waving. Also to Beth Hermaszewska, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who is a caseworker at Advocate, formerly the Bar Pro Bono unit. And we're also joined by Debra Long, who is the International Policy Manager at the Law Society of England and Wales. So good morning to all of you. Our session today is concentrating on pro bono culture, how to engender it, how to support it, and the importance of it to law students, early career movers, and at every stage really of our professional careers. And what I thought we could do is just start by discussing a couple of issues around pro bono work together. And then, of course, we'll keep an eye on the chat or in the Q&A. So please do ask any questions that you would like to as we go along, and I'll deal with them most probably at the end. So please do feel free to put your questions in the box. But let's kick off then with this big point about pro bono culture. Why is it so important for individuals, us all as practitioners, and also the legal profession as a whole? And I suppose I'm also thinking about legal aid lawyers, of which I am one. Why do legal aid lawyers who already do a lot of human rights work also do pro bono work, and what do we think of the distinction between those two? So Debra, given your role, I thought I might start with you on that question. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, and hello everyone. Yeah, as was mentioned, so I'm the International Policy Manager for Rule of Law and Human Rights at the Law Society, so basically in charge of our human rights programme. And we actually work very closely with a lot of lawyers in a pro bono capacity. It was interesting that pro bono work obviously was mentioned in the last session, so it's very, I think, key to a lot of human rights work. Very quickly, just in terms of what the distinction is, so legal aid is sort of legal services funded by the government, just put it very simply, and pro bono work is legal advice that's provided for free. I guess one thing I'd say from the off is pro bono work is not a substitute for legal aid. We need a properly funded and effective legal aid system, but pro bono work can be very complementary system. And certainly the Law Society has seen that over the years, solicitors have for a very long time actually been doing pro bono work alongside their other kind of legal activities. And sort of the percentages vary, but it's between 35 and 40% of solicitors do some pro bono work. So that's quite high, really, considering everyone's sort of very busy schedules and other commitments. So why do we see that lawyers are doing pro bono work? I guess fundamentally it's to ensure that people have access to justice when they need it. People may not be able to afford legal services or may not be entitled to legal aid. And certainly we're seeing sort of legal aid being squeezed in very recent years. Therefore, pro bono work can sort of ensure that people have access to legal professional assistance when they need it. I thought it might be interesting just to hear a little bit about how we work with lawyers doing pro bono work. The Law Society is a membership organisation, so we represent, support our members. So these are solicitors who decide to join the Law Society. We also work with law firms who, as was mentioned in the last session, many have some form of pro bono schemes. And our members work with us in a sort of variety of different voluntary capacities. So sort of speaking, I suppose, from a human rights perspective, and our Lawyers at Risk programme. So we have a programme that I'm in charge of where we provide support to lawyers throughout the world who face human rights violations because of the work they do or because of the clients that they represent. Some are human rights defenders, but not all. Some are just doing their normal day-to-day legal professional jobs, but find themselves then targeted as a result. So part of the Law Society's job is to protect and support those lawyers. And we work with other lawyers in a pro bono capacity to do that. So we have members that might be appointed to sit on our Human Rights Committee or International Committee, and then we work with them very closely. They help shape our own strategy and approaches and our own policy as well. But also outside of that sort of more formal engagement, we work with solicitors and law firms undertaking a number of pro bono activities. So we have members who might come and join us on a trial observation. So we might go to a country and to see firsthand what is happening with a trial or hearing, to be able to then record and speak with authority over any unfair trials or human rights violations that we might be witness to. So we have volunteers who will come and join us on those. And also then, of course, being very active in sort of monitoring violations that are ongoing. We also will draw on people's expertise a lot. So we get a lot of help with kind of amicus briefs or other types of petitions to the UN and regional human rights bodies. And these are solicitors who are giving their advice and expertise for free, really to try and strengthen or ensure that human rights standards are maintained, if not advanced. Again, looking at expertise and drawing on that expertise, we also work with solicitors involved in sort of standard setting processes. So at the moment, there's a really interesting development at the Council of Europe with a draft convention for the protection of lawyers. And we're working with a group of our members to kind of pick their brains in order to ensure that our submissions around that draft are as robust as possible. And again, they're giving that advice and time for free. And we're sort of very privileged to be able to draw on that experience. Then looking perhaps a bit more closely at some of our work with law firms who do pro bono work. So we have worked with them undertaking research to try and understand some of the reasons and root causes why lawyers might be targeted because of the work. So lawyers have done some research for us looking at sedition laws. So lawyers being caught up, being charged with crimes against the state because of something they might have said or because of clients that they represented. We've also got a research report that's coming out around mass trials where lawyers have been caught up and charged and then sort of tried in these mass trials. So again, just highlighting some of the kind of causes or some of the challenges that lawyers are facing. There was also some research that was done around, there are some UN basic principles on the role of lawyers, and these are really key international standards that I use daily and sort of reference in all of our work. And we worked with a number of law firms to try and get some good practice and implementation of those basic principles that we could share and then try and encourage to do the same, others to do the same. So that's sort of kind of flavor of how we work or how I work also very directly and daily with lawyers doing pro bono work for us. Why do lawyers do this on top of a very busy schedule already? As I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of it we see is out of a desire to really support the community within which they're working, as well as also the broader international community of lawyers that we are all a part of. And I think there's a very much a strong desire to try and ensure that our colleagues who are facing challenges are supported and feel supported, whether it's from a practical point of view or even a moral support. I was in a fact-finding mission to Turkey a couple of weeks ago, and actually the moral support that just being able to visit someone a lawyer who's imprisoned kind of means an awful lot to them, but also to those doing the visiting as well, a kind of tangible sort of human interaction that you can have as a kind of doing human rights work. So as part of that sort of community and sort of international global community work, I think is one of the reasons we see lawyers undertaking sort of pro bono work. Also, from an individual's point of view, you can get exposure, and I think this was something that was mentioned in the last session. You can get exposure to quite a broad range of human rights issues and stakeholders. You can really develop contacts and really useful networks and again, sort of interest with organizations. You can share your own experiences. You can learn from others from doing it. You may also get exposure to mechanisms that you might not otherwise be able to do, such as UN mechanisms or regional human rights bodies. We also have a lot of members, and some of those who are most active on human rights issues are not doing human rights law directly as their legal services on a day-to-day basis, but are nevertheless interested in human rights and have a desire to do pro bono work as a result, really as a way to try and fulfill that interest and own sort of own desire in order to kind of be working on human rights issues. As I mentioned, I think we're also seeing that sort of doing pro bono work, people get a kind of real sense of a need to support colleagues in other jurisdictions and sort of building that sense of solidarity of lawyers. Also, we're all in a unique position of being able to understand how difficult it can be to practice as a lawyer and to be practicing in a profession that can often be targeted and criticised in many different ways, rightly or wrongly, but sort of certainly seeing how important it is for the independence of the legal profession to be protected for the benefit of all society, really. So I think as lawyers, we sort of understand that, and I think we certainly see our members who engage in human rights work have a real desire to try and protect those lawyers who globally who might be in more difficult circumstances than ourselves, and can also be often deeply moved by the hardships that our colleagues experience in very difficult contexts. Again, from a personal experience as well, people can get sort of hands-on experience and develop their own knowledge and contacts. And also from a law firm perspective, can also get an opportunity to increase their own visibility in the brand and a way of sort of giving back as well to, again, the society and as well as sort of lawyers abroad. So I think there's some of the reasons we see people kind of very actively involved in a lot of the human rights work that we undertake. I guess the benefit to us as well is that as a membership organisation, we need to ensure we reflect and support the interests of our members. I have to say we're a very small team of human rights team at the Law Society. So we really benefit from the range of expertise that we can draw on for free. We can do a lot more as a result of the kind of very generous support that we get from our volunteers. And we can take on many more issues. And therefore, I think hopefully our impact and our reach can be a lot broader. And again, it sort of strengthens the visibility and the sort of scope of the work we do, but also the raising awareness of the fact that lawyers are at risk globally. And I think, unfortunately, we're seeing sort of a kind of common trend globally of lawyers being targeted because of the work they do or the clients that they represent. So again, it's sort of being part of that international community. So I'll leave it at that for now, but that sort of hopefully gives a flavour of why we see lawyers doing pro bono work, but also how it helps me and my team do the job that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Debra. And that's a really comprehensive overview of all of the different reasons why lawyers and law students might do pro bono work at different stages of their career, and also the important distinction between legal aid and pro bono in an increasing climate of legal aid cuts, as you say. I know that our other panelists will want to come in on some of those points, but I might just move on to question 2, and I'll turn to our 2 panelists who may want to pick up on some of the points that you make as well, Debra. But a similar point really about what motivates legal professionals to engage in pro bono work, and this point that Debra's touched on about how it benefits both them as an individual in a range of ways, but also the organisation. So both Beth and Yasmin will have thoughts on this. I wonder if, Beth, I can start with you, because We Are Advocate is obviously an organisation that works very closely with barristers in terms of pro bono work. What are your thoughts on those points about motivation?
Yeah, absolutely. We have over a quarter of the bar in England and Wales signed up to volunteer through Advocate using our licence. So they effectively are providing legal representation and advice in a direct access manner. And yeah, everyone we work with is extremely busy and has a busy practice, but there are lots of reasons that they also find time to do pro bono work. Of course, the obvious things like, you know, their altruism and an interest in supporting access for justice, causes they believe in, and responding to pressing needs and emergencies. For example, last year we ran a project linking up city law firms and people in Afghanistan and neighbouring countries seeking refugee status in the UK, and barristers who didn't necessarily work in immigration law but had other skills to offer or were just particularly passionate about the issue, provided legal expertise in that area. There is a kind of personal and well-being aspect to it, filling quiet spaces in your diary or time periods in your diary. We love to hear about that and make sure we can fill that gap, but also supporting your mental health, thinking about finding motivation and job satisfaction in the work that you do. Our clients can be very different to the kinds of clients barristers normally dealing with, and often are the volunteer barristers come back and say how nice it was to work with someone who was really, really grateful for that they got, because it was the last opportunity they had to have any help. But also practical and more career-minded motivations. So developing skills, supporting your practice in areas of law where perhaps you don't get much advocacy experience, you know, having more time in court, developing relations with solicitors or with senior counsel. So we have a mentoring scheme. So a more junior barrister or someone who is working in an area of law beyond their specialisms can have a mentor who is an expert in that area of law, and that develops wonderful relationships which go far beyond their work with Advocate into their own private practice too. And then expanding and changing your practice. Barristers who want to, you know, move their housing practice into more landlord and tenant issues, for example, can take on work through us with the kind of comfort of knowing that it's not a paying client, and that there is kind of, they're only doing a piece of advice, for example, and not kind of taking on an entire case. And things like applying for Silk, the appointments guidance confirms that pro bono cases can be included in the cases you include in your application, shows diversity, competence. Same with applying for the bench or applying for kind of other panels. So yeah, there are so many reasons, and it is something that people like to integrate into their practice from the beginning, so that later on down their career the rewards can start to be reaped even more.
Thank you, Beth. And just to agree, as somebody who's on the Advocate panel, it's a brilliant way to get access to clients who really need support where they wouldn't otherwise have funding for legal support, and also a really good way of acting collectively. So I was involved in a scheme when the EU settlement scheme came in for EU nationals to apply at the end of the Brexit deadline. There was a sharp cliff edge whereby lots of especially vulnerable children and families wouldn't have their status in time. And with Advocate, we put together a bar-wide scheme with just about 6 weeks to go, and over 70 barristers volunteered, were trained up, and helped to put in lots of applications on behalf of the people who really needed it. So not only was I able to do a couple of cases myself, but working with Advocate, we were able to make a bigger difference. And that's one of the things about working with institutions and organizations on pro bono work, is the impact can actually be bigger and quicker because you can achieve more together. The same applies, I think, to Debra, some of the points you were making about lawyers at risks and trial observations. Very similar work to what we do with the Bar Human Rights Committee, and that kind of collective pro bono work can have such a huge difference. So thank you both for that. Yasmin, I don't know if you want to come in on this point about motivation. You're my first target for the next question, but is there anything you'd like to mention at this point?
No, I think it was really well covered, actually. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Yasmin. The point that I most wanted to discuss with you is about fostering this culture of pro bono services that we've spoken about, particularly within law firms and other organisations, and also thinking about universities, vocational providers, bar training, solicitor training. How can we embody and promote pro bono culture within those organisations?
Thank you very much. Can I just say hello, everyone? It's really good to be here. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me. It's actually now 8 o'clock here in the evening. I'm in a place called Cebu in the Philippines, where I'm attending the Asia Pro Bono Conference, which I'm speaking at later in the week. So it's really good to be here, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that the Wi-Fi will work throughout this session. Okay, so thanks for the question. And I would say that I believe in creating a pro bono culture within legal firms and other organisations really requires a multifaceted approach that integrates pro bono work as an integral part of the ethos and daily operations of the firm or organisation. To cultivate this culture, in my view, it's essential to start at the leadership level, so it's top down, where the commitment to pro bono is articulated, advocated, and importantly, visibly supported. This might, for instance, involve establishing clear policies that encourage and incentivize pro bono work, allocating resources, of course, and demonstrating a strong commitment to social responsibility within the organisation's strategic vision. Clifford Chance, the firm, as you all know, for instance, it's a major law firm within the Magic Circle, and they've embraced the UN Sustainable Development Goal Agenda, which are very, very much part of the DNA of the firm. Other firms do this by encouraging participation in pro bono, by incorporating it into performance assessments and recognition programs. I think establishing dedicated pro bono committees or coordinators can also ensure that pro bono is actively promoted and resources and support are readily available. I also think, and this was mentioned at the previous panel, that the role of internal communication is very important. Regular communication, celebration of successful pro bono efforts can inspire others, and crucially, it fosters a sense of pride and purpose within the organisation or the firm. Collaborating with legal aid organisations, as we've heard already earlier, non-profits such as A4ID, hello, we're here, community groups is a must, and can provide a structured pro bono opportunities as well as long-term partnerships. These partnerships not only offer a wealth of pro bono cases, but also enrich the firm and the organisation's understanding of the community's needs, fostering therefore a deep connection to the causes which they support. Now, in respect to the other part of the question, which was the legal education, universities, vocational training providers, I believe they play a pivotal role in embedding a pro bono culture into the very fabric of future legal professionals training. For me, it begins by integrating pro bono work into the curriculum, not merely as an option, but as a core component. Simulated pro bono cases, clinics, or practical experiences, I think also will be an essential part of the education, providing students with real world exposure and experience in serving marginalised communities. Additionally, establishing mandatory pro bono credits or service hours for graduation can also ensure that future lawyers comprehend and appreciate the importance of giving back into the community. Mentorship programs with practicing pro bono lawyers can also offer students valuable guidance, insight, and often, very often, inspiration as well. Furthermore, like law firms, universities can develop partnerships with legal aid organisations and organisations like ours at A4ID or community groups to create opportunities for students to engage in pro bono work. These collaborations can expose students to a very diverse range of cases and issues, broadening their perspectives and deepening their commitment to pro bono service. One of our own projects from last year, which comprised a series of trainings for justice stakeholders in Argentina on adversarial court proceedings, was delivered in partnership with a UK university. And more recently, a team of students from one of the universities in London produced a research paper on the treatment of female prisoners on death row. Now, this paper was very important because it fed directly into the existing work on the death penalty in a variety of jurisdictions, so it's really helpful indeed. Ultimately, it is by creating an internal pro bono programme with clear mandate that legal organisations and universities can truly embed a culture of pro bono, by instilling a sense of responsibility, pride and commitment. Both law firms as well as educational institutions can inspire a new generation, that's all of you out there, of learning professionals dedicated to those, serving those in need. And that, of course, is why we're all here.
Thank you, Yasmin, and some really interesting ideas, particularly on embedding pro bono work in the university and vocational sector. Thank you very much for that. I suppose picking up on some of those themes about partnerships, which, as we've been discussing, are at the core of a lot of successful big pro bono projects. That kind of collaboration and liaison with stakeholders, including parliamentarians, the court system, NGOs, etc. I want to bring in our other panelists on those partnerships and how they can be cultivated to sort of maximise the effectiveness in addressing human rights challenges, and any best practices that you have in terms of partnerships and how to make them as beneficial as possible. So Yasmin, I'll come back to you perhaps in a moment, giving you some time to rest after the last question. But Beth, I wonder, is there anything you would like to say about partnerships in light of the work that Advocate do?
Yes, definitely. I mean, the collaboration is completely essential to the work that we do. I mean, on a basic level, we often receive cases through referrals from other organisations such as Citizens Advice Bureau, but also Refugee Council, Freedom from Torture, and they are places where applicants kind of, are local, they're organisations local to them, and then it kind of gets passed on this chain of pro bono organisations to look after the applicant through all the stages in their journey. And also we do the same, we signpost to other organisations too, especially as we are limited in our scope of working only with the bar. So when it's pre-action and a barrister is not yet needed, signposting applicants to other places that they can get help. But as I think the important thing to say is that pro bono is obviously driven by the needs of the people that we help, but the foundations of it and what it looks like comes from the needs of other organisations and the gaps that are kind of left between all of our work. So a really good example is a new scheme that we've set up called, which is the Chancery Litigant In-Person Support Scheme. And that came through conversations between the judiciary and Advocate, specifically the judiciary in the North Eastern Circuit. And they saw that there was a huge rise in litigants in person in chancery courts, and that unlike in other areas such as London, there just weren't organisations to signpost them to. So through our wonderful network and the name that we kind of have in England and Wales, we've been able to set up a scheme where there will be a duty barrister there at courts most days of the week to provide advice on the day to people. And not only is that hugely helpful and comforting and supportive to the people who are otherwise litigants in person, but also hugely helpful for the judiciary that they have litigants in person who have support and have received some advice before they're getting there. But that schemes come about through collaboration, but also communication. So working out where that gap was, and we wouldn't have known there's a specific gap in the Chancery Courts in Leeds without judges coming to us. So in terms obviously there are people in this call that aren't yet at that level in their career, or that stage in their career, but there are ways to get involved earlier on than that in those partnerships and conversations. So there are lots of pro bono committees in the regions beyond London. So there's one in Manchester, one in Birmingham, one in the North East. I'm sure there are others too, but they're ones my colleagues are part of. And they meet every few months to discuss the shape of pro bono in that circuit, mapping the existing pro bono services to then identify where those gaps are. And the attendees are us, but also pro bono charities such as LawWorks, local chambers, local judiciary, law students, and law schools who run legal clinics. So I'd really recommend getting involved in that conversation to see how partnerships work, but also getting involved in making the partnerships better.
Thank you, Beth. And I think that's a really good idea for people or our participants to think about, where are the gaps? How can they be best filled, collaborating and working with others? And as you say, it can sometimes be quite a simple idea, and simply being proactive and reaching out to organisations who you think can help. And I would really encourage our participants to have a think about the issues that they think are most pressing, that they most want to help with, to have a think about the gaps, as you say, and to actually think about ways in which they can be proactive and take responsibility for coming up with often quite simple ways as to make some progress on those issues. And I think that example you've given is really good, and I hope we'll get people thinking on what they might be able to do to try to work with others to address some of the issues that might be at the fore of their mind. So thank you for that. Debra or Yasmin, anything that you would like to say on partnerships? Obviously, Yasmin, you've spoken and given some very good examples of it. Debra or Yasmin, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I can say a little bit about the work that we're doing, and I would start by saying that A4ID is all about partnerships and partnership working. Partnerships are and always have been central to the work of A4ID. Indeed, I'd say we couldn't exist without them. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, are also very much at the heart of what we do and are the framework on which our work is based. And they comprise 17 goals requiring practical action to protect human rights, protect the planet, and also to ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity. The last goal, SDG 17, is about partnerships, which is essential if all other goals are to be achieved. We work in partnership with law firms and corporates, which provide us with a network of over 50,000 lawyers working with us worldwide. We work with over 900 development organisations comprising NGOs, civil society organisations, in-country governments and organisations such as the World Bank and the UN, and they come to us with their pro bono requests. These partnerships, in a nutshell, enable us, through our work, to strengthen the rule of law around the world, allowing for the equitable achievement of the sustainable outcomes and maintain our commitment, and to quote the UN, to ensure that we leave no one behind. Indeed, we've worked in now over 130 countries so far. I just want to say something very quickly about cultivation of these partnerships in terms of what I think is essential, because I do think they do require careful nurturing. And for me, the essential ingredients to successful partnership working include the building of mutual respect and trust. It's crucial, for instance, that each party respects the expertise and perspectives of others. Trust forms, for me, the very foundation of effective collaboration, ensuring transparency and conducive environment for problem solving. The establishment of clear communication and clear goals also is pivotal. Each stakeholder should understand the overall objectives and the specific role that they play and the expected outcomes they wish to achieve. This clarity results in a unified approach and minimises potential for any possible misunderstandings. Sustained partnerships, I think, thrive on continuous coordination and collaboration. So therefore, you need to have regular meetings, joint strategizing, and information sharing also allows for alignment and adjustments based on all the things that keep evolving and changing and the challenges that are as a result of a lot of this work. Human rights challenges, as you all know probably, are multidimensional and always evolving. Therefore, it's important to be flexible and adaptable in your approach, and the strategies are absolutely essential. So important to be open to change and adjust different methodologies based on real-time feedback and emerging trends that can significantly enhance the impact. And finally, I'd say that true partnership is one of equals, regardless of whether it's a global law firm working with a tiny NGO. Each brings its strengths and knowledge to the table, with each having a different role to play. So to conclude, these best practices, the collaborative effort of legal professionals and civil society organisations, are essential in order to be able to provide a more potent force for addressing and resolving human rights challenges. So partnership is all.
Thank you, Yasmin. That's really helpful and emphatic, and I think we probably all agree with that analysis. Debra, I know we want to move on to some personal reflections now. Is there anything you briefly want to add on this point about partnerships? I know you've spoken about some of the Law Society's very effective partnerships and how crucial they are to achieve what you achieve. Any further observations?
Yes, probably just, and it probably also leads into a personal reflection as well, so I hope that helps. So yeah, with the Law Society, we have many kind of partners that we work with and collaborate with, and as well as law firms and our members, there's also a range of organisations we work with, could be other law societies in other countries, who we either support or we kind of help with sort of capacity building or draw on their expertise that they can feed into and do joint reports, for example, to the UN. And again, sort of I think that idea of respect and trust is very key, as Yasmin mentioned. We also work with different range of partners in order to coordinate our work and to kind of, I guess, make our voices stronger by kind of joining together. So we do a lot of joint statements, a lot of joint reports and events. And I think that can really, really help to kind of resonate with a kind of broader range of audiences. So as well as I mentioned law firms that we work with, there's kind of a range of organizations, NGOs, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Redress Trust for torture survivors, as well as others who have a very focus like us around lawyers at risk. So we've developed those partnerships over the years, and we make sure that we have really good contact with them and regular contact to see what other people are doing, to make sure we're not duplicating, but we're actually joining forces and sort of contributing and collaborating effectively. I guess the personal reflection I wanted to draw in there is also one of our partnerships is with human rights centres at universities. Now, a lot of universities have human rights centres now, which is great. I have to say, when I moved into human rights doing law, they weren't a thing. So it's great that there are so many opportunities now as a law student to get involved and in different ways. So we've had research that's been done in conjunction with the Human Rights Centre at Essex. So they've really helped us, and their students have been very key in terms of helping pull kind of that key research together. I've also got sort of close links with Bristol and the law school there. So there's a human rights centre that was set up, and actually that one was set up through a student who came to the law school, realised that there wasn't actually a human rights law clinic in place, and so requested that there could be one, and so worked with the professors and other members of staff there to set one up, and that's been going now for a long time, doing very key work. Could be casework for organisations. Again, a lot of NGOs are also kind of stretched and kind of doing volunteer work can really help them be able to achieve their mandate and vision. So definitely at the Bristol Human Rights Clinic, students were very keen in terms of helping with that case law. I also was involved with that Human Rights Law Clinic with a piece of research for the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And they have a committee for the prevention of torture in Africa. A very key special procedure of the African Commission does really good work, but like a lot of human rights mechanisms, if not all, is really underfunded, understaffed, and struggles. They are also, the commissioners themselves are volunteers, so it's very difficult for them to kind of try and do everything that their mandate demands. So the Human Rights Law Clinic and that work was a way of trying to help that committee for the prevention of torture better engage with states around torture prevention issues. So they kind of gathered reports of torture or ill treatment, and that fed into a report which the committee then as a whole looked at and then developed as their own annual report. So a kind of very tangible result from the research of the students actually then being fed into very directly conversations and publications from a regional human rights body. So I think that's sort of somewhere where students could really see that their work sort of fed into a very sort of public engagement, which was really good. I guess the flip side of that is sort of also perhaps showing some of the gaps and challenges for human rights bodies and organizations, that there is often a kind of dependency on volunteer work because of a lack of funding. So as well as an opportunity, I think it also shows perhaps a sort of bit of a gap and a challenge for all human rights bodies, that without that sort of support, the very direct and robust and kind of engagement that they have would be lessened. So I think that is a shame, but as well, it's an opportunity to get involved and to support those bodies that need that help.
Thank you, Debra, and thank you also for that personal reflection. I can see that in our chat, there's a small pitch for the Bar Human Rights Committee, and to say that we also do accept student members. So if you are interested in getting involved in international human rights pro bono work, not dissimilar to the type that has been described by Debra in terms of the Law Society, but from a barrister angle, then please do have a look at that and think about joining us. Just very quickly, in terms of my personal reflections, BHRC wise, we have a huge number of partnerships from everybody from the Bar Council to the Foreign Office to international bar associations, the American Bar Association, the Nigerian Bar Association, as well as leading in NGOs that we work specifically on certain countries or thematic issues with. And it's a bit like Debra has said, is a wonderful opportunity to get involved with interesting and important work. So, for example, I have been in Nigeria with UNICEF training on children's rights. We've done training in Kazakhstan on international human rights issues, as well as amicus briefs and trial observations. We're currently, I think, still the only British organisation with access to Guantanamo Bay who are conducting those trial observations. So just a few examples of the types of work and the impact of them that BHRC can have alongside those observations from Debra. Could I move, Beth, to you on your personal sort of reflection on pro bono work? You've obviously given us the example of the new initiative and other initiatives that Advocate have set up. Is there anything you would like to share personally on this topic of pro bono work and a project you've been involved in?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I'm early on in my career, but all of throughout, even before I went to law school, I was volunteering and was involved in pro bono, and all of those opportunities have looked very different, have developed different skills for me, but also have evoked and left me with very memorable experiences and working with very memorable clients. So yeah, I worked at A4ID, citizens advice, with law clinics at university, with solicitors doing human rights work on their research just in my spare time, and now working at Advocate. I mean, I have applicants every day who have extremely memorable stories and are hugely, deserving isn't the right word, but are hugely in need of help and support. And I mean, from last week, one applicant, he's fled from Afghanistan with his family. He has settled in the UK, and he received help through legal aid on his immigration proceedings. However, he's now separated from his wife, and his wife seeks to move to Canada, where she's been granted asylum with her children. And he has no, he can't access legal aid for this issue because it's in the family courts, and legal aid has been significantly cut in that area of law. And so he has nowhere else to turn to. He's not, English is not his first language, and the whole situation has been incredibly overwhelming for the last, 3 or 4 years. And now it's looking, he hasn't seen his children now for a few months because the mother has breached various court orders and blocked contact, and now he fears that they're going to be taken to Canada and settled there, and he can't visit them because of his immigration status in the UK. And it was a wonderful result in that we found a lawyer up in Newcastle, where he's based, who drafted his position statement and will now provide representation at his hearing next week. But I think it's a really good example of one of so many cases in which people are completely cut off from accessing justice and being able to kind of put their point across to a judge on the day. And not only is that really stressful before, but it also means that they're afterwards, it takes a long time for people to recover because they don't feel like they were heard properly, that they were able to portray their version of events. And so, yeah, that's something that resonated, only happened last week, and hopefully, he will feel that he's been helped next week when he has a barrister with him on the day. So yeah, that's one of so many stories that we've been able to help.
Thank you, Beth, and a really good example of the sort of day-to-day impact that pro bono work can have. I'm conscious that we're coming to the end of the session. I really want to hear from all of you on a tip that you have for our participants. So mainly law students or possibly early career practitioners who want to do pro bono work. What sort of tip or strategy would you leave them with or recommend to them in terms of starting to do this work? And Yasmin, I thought I would start with you, and you can also tell us a quick personal reflection if you'd like to, but I'm thinking of our participants who are hopefully now galvanized to take some action. What would everyone's primary tip be? So Yasmin, I'll start with you.
It helps to put sound on, doesn't it? I suppose the key tip that I would leave with you is that pro bono culture is the heartbeat of the legal profession, the embodiment of its intrinsic responsibility to uphold the justice for all. It's, if you like, the shining light, the beacon that illuminates the path for a fairer, more just society, where the scales of justice are not tipped by financial prowess, but by the relentless pursuit of equity.
Thank you, Yasmin. Debra, any tips that you would briefly like to leave with our participants?
Yes, I guess in terms of thinking about doing kind of pro bono work, perhaps, I mean, it's an obvious one, but think about what really interests you, what really gets you in the gut that you really want to work on, and then look for organisations that perhaps undertake that work. There's a whole range of opportunities to do pro bono work in different ways, but I guess also be really realistic about your time as well, because it's obviously we're all really pushed and our schedules are very busy, so be realistic about time. Don't overpromise as well, but there's still stuff that you can do even with a small amount of time. But also just the sense of fulfillment. It's something that keeps coming up, isn't it? The sense of fulfillment that you get out of doing that pro bono work. hopefully will make up for having a little bit less time on other things. But yeah, basically there's lots of, I think there's lots of resources out there as well for trying to find what those opportunities are. So kind of think about what really interests you, and then think about, well, what time can I give and how, and then try and match those up.
That's really good advice. And I agree with you, Deborah. I think I would say to identify the issue or the gap, whichever way you want to think about it, and then show some leadership and think about how you can take some action on that, whether acting alone or in a partnership, and think about the way to achieve the most amount of realistic impact. So I think that's it's actually more achievable than it might sound based on all the stories that we've heard today. I know we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A that I want to turn to, but Beth, your final tip to leave with our participants who want to get going with some pro bono work after this session, what would you say?
Well, of course, apply to Volunteer with Advocate, whether you are a barrister, we work with solicitors as well, but also if you're a law student, we run schemes where you either help allocate cases, and that's huge exposure to the bar, speaking to barristers, speaking to clerks, or processing our cases for us. But less selfishly, I think work out why you want to work in human rights law. I think it's a term that's thrown around a lot between law students who want to show that they're altruistic, but think about what it is that motivates you to do it. And human rights work exists beyond human rights law, and other areas of law have a human rights element. And I think if you start to think of it more broadly like that, opportunities really open up. You might not be working with a human rights organisation, but you'll be doing work that does tackle injustice.
Thanks, Beth. And that's a really important point about the breadth of the impact and how it doesn't have to be necessarily applying human rights law to be important pro bono work that promotes human rights in a broader sense. Thank you for that. So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A which we may have touched on, but let's just quickly cover them. Thank you to those who've asked questions. In what way can law students give input into the changes and development of human rights abroad? I think Deborah and I have touched on that in terms of some of the projects, but I'll briefly see if anybody wants to come in particular on the point, are there any student panels for discussion, etc. So Deborah, any ways that students can get involved on international human rights? You will have all heard my pitch for the Bar Human Rights Committee, and the information is in the chat. So that's what I would say in answer to that question. Deborah, anything briefly you would like to add?
Well, yes, I would also kind of obviously mirror that. I think it's a great initiative, but also, as I mentioned, I suppose previously, as a law student, kind of look what's available through your university. Most universities have some form of law clinic or human rights centre, as well as kind of also reaching out to those members of staff who do that type of human rights work as well. As I mentioned, the Human Rights Law Clinic at Bristol was set up because a law student approached one of the kind of leading professors there on international human rights law, and together they set it up. So, excuse me. So I kind of look for those sort of opportunities as well. But there's also NGOs as well who quite often are putting out opportunities for volunteer work, perhaps during the summer break. And again, sort of I certainly know law students who have taken advantage of that. And then you've got a really good contact with a NGO. For example, myself, I did an internship when I was wanting to move into human rights. I did an internship for an NGO for about 6 months. And then actually I was very lucky. That was my entry point. I was offered a job at the end of that. That doesn't always happen, but at least it also gave me an opportunity for contacts and further exposure. So I think kind of look for those sort of different opportunities that might actually be on your doorstep.
Thanks, Deborah. Excellent advice. Yasmin, anything you would like to add on ways in which students in particular can get involved with working on human rights issues abroad? As you join us in the Philippines, you are the most well served to comment, perhaps.
Okay, well, I think the key point I'd want to make here is that you must be proactive. Projects don't just land on your lap. I think research and networking is essential. You can begin by researching organisations that are working within the human rights field, such as A4ID. and look, as mentioned already, for legal clinics, NGOs, other things like that. Network also through things like career fairs, alumni associations, or legal conferences. I'm sure many law schools already offer clinics or programs focused on human rights. But it's really important to actively engage with these resources, especially because they've been there to enable you to have practical experience. Reach out and volunteer by contacting organisations directly and express your interest in contributing to their work. Be enthusiastic. I think that's really essential, whether it's about drafting legal documents, conducting research, or offering administrative support. Your willingness really will be appreciated, and importantly, it demonstrates initiative. I've mentioned mentorship earlier on, and also I would say what you're doing today, listening to this seminar, for instance, and attending, is exactly what you ought to be doing. Participate, therefore, in events, workshops, seminars related to human rights. These sort of gatherings not only offer knowledge and insights, but also opportunities to hear from professionals. And then showcase your commitment. And by that, I mean tailor your CVs, your covering letters, your LinkedIn profiles to highlight your commitment to human rights work. And it's really important to be persistent and be patient in your research. And finding the right opportunities will take time. So keep pushing and don't worry about being rejected or the fact that there aren't immediate opportunities. Don't let those deter you. Just keep reaching out and keep expanding your network. And then you'll find that something will land on your lap. And I'm sure I don't need to say this, but leverage online platforms like websites and other online platforms. For instance, look at the A4ID website, and also visit our SDG Legal Initiative platform, which signposts the type of work which is being done by lawyers in respect to human rights and rule of law. These communities very much offer a network of like-minded individuals, and also there are access to exclusive opportunities. And finally, as I say, join our SDG Legal Initiative, which is a call to action to the global legal profession to work together in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So there are lots of things that you can do, huge amounts of information that you can get, and lots of resources available to you. Check out our SDG Legal Initiative. That's all you have to do to look at the website, and you'll find there's a lot you can actually do that will benefit you trying to access work on human rights.
Thank you, Yasmin. And I think that's actually a perfect summary and a perfect way to conclude the seminar. And thank you. And I can see that various links have been added in the chat, including to those SDG Legal Initiative that Yasmin's referred to, including what I think is a job opportunity with Beth. So hopefully somebody will get that, having attended this seminar. So thank you all very, very much for attending. Thank you to our excellent speakers for generously sharing your experiences, sharing your exceptional advice with our participants. It's hugely appreciated. And I think that now draws to an end our session. But of course, we're having a short lunch break now, and then back at 1 o'clock for session 4, which is on resilience and mental well-being in human rights work, which, as we know, is absolutely vital. It's chaired by my co-vice chair of the Bar Human Rights Committee, Grainne, who will be leading that session. So please return at 1 o'clock. But for now, thank you very, very much for joining us, and a huge thanks to the panel for all of your insights. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.